Welcome back to the Hive, everybody. Today we honor these three legends from Speedway from New Zealand. They are Kiwis for sure. Three of the top 10 Speedway riders of all time to race the sport of Speedway. If you're new to the channel, please join our family by subscribing and becoming a member. Comment below who is your favorite Speedway rider of all time. We want to know who your favorite rider is. Well, today we're talking about Ronnie Moore, Barry Briggs, and Ivan Mauger. Three of the New Zealand Kiwis, all from Christchurch, living legends of the sport of Speedway.
Well, I had a car that wouldn't hardly crank. Then I put a tiger in my tank. Now you ought to hear them tires squeal. I can pass anything on four wheels. Yeah, I got a tiger in my tank. If there's any doubt, when I pass you on the road, you see his tail hanging out. Now going down the road about 103, radar man sitting behind a big tree. He was trying to check me when I looked at him. I wrung that needle right off at the stem. Yeah, I got a tiger in my tank. If there's any doubt, you can pass me on the road and see his tail hanging out. Talk to me, tiger. Now there was this hot rod that lived in town. Said he had the fastest car of anybody around. We got side by side one Saturday night. When I throwed it in second, I was out of sight. Yeah, I got a tiger in my tank. If there's any doubt, when I pass you on the road, you see his tail hanging out. Tell him something, tiger. I was going through a town in Tennessee. 12 police cars was after me. Well, they pulled off the road and turned around when they seen that tiger's tail hanging down. Yeah, I got a tiger in my tank. If there's any doubt, you can pass me on the road, you'll see his tail hanging out. Speak one time, tiger. I took this redhead for a ride. I pulled up close by my side. She said, listen here, bud, I got news for you. You got a tiger in the front seat, too. Yeah, I got a tiger in my tank. If there's any doubt, you can pass me on the road, you'll see his tail hanging out. Let me hear you one time, tiger. Oh, roll one time, Bub.
Ronnie Moore, that guy was good. Did you see that wall of death? He actually started that when he was like 10 years old. His dad ran this like circus in Christchurch, New Zealand, and they traveled all over. And Ronnie Moore was just a little boy, and his dad says, hey, Ronnie, we need another rider. Get out there. So Ronnie Moore actually was a circus-like rider at the age of 10. I believe that that's where actually Ronnie Moore developed his skills at such a young age. You know, the wall of death, I call it the circle of death. It's that wall that they used to have back in the old days. And they used to ride the motorcycles around that wall. It was really crazy. And it was just unbelievable. And his dad like threw him out there, and he was riding that wall of death when he was just a little boy. Can you imagine like your son being like 10 years old and you say, go out there, son, and ride the wall of death? And that's exactly what Ronnie Moore's dad did. He threw his kid out there. But you know what? It was good. Why? Because Ronnie Moore developed into one of the greatest speedway riders of all time. And he developed his skill. I believe that Ronnie Moore was really one of the naturally best gifted, most natural speedway riders ever of all time. Because of his experience in the Wall of Death, I think. And it was really amazing that how good of rider he was. And he actually was 17 years old when he rode in his first World Championship event. And at the age of 17, he was the youngest ever to qualify to be in the World Championship. That is amazing. And at 21 years old, he was the youngest to win the championship. And we have the 1954 championship, and we're going to actually watch that. And Ronnie Moore just was an amazing rider, and he won championships. He won two. He won 1954. Actually, he scored a maximum of 15 points here. I mean, this guy was good. And then in 1959, Ronnie Moore, he won his second world championship with a broken leg. I mean, the guy had a broken leg, and he won a world championship. That was amazing. And oh, thank you so much. Always so informative of life and records of your guests. Thank you so much, Vincent. I appreciate it. You're welcome to leave comments here. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for your kind words. And we're putting on a show today of an amazing rider. I mean, this guy, he won the 1959 World Championship with a broken leg. That guy's crazy. And so he inspires us motorcycle riders to actually be gifted riders, even with broken legs. I mean, this guy's good. And so we're going to go ahead and see that first. He was only 21 years old. He was the youngest world champion at 21 years old. Ronnie Moore. This guy is sensational. Not too many people talk about Ronnie Moore, but this guy is unbelievable.
Every bike, as you'd expect, has to be in perfect trim for the World Speedway Championship at Wembley. Finalists included Ola Nygrund, Sweden, Jack Young, Australia and West Ham, Split Waterman, Haringey, England, Brian Crutcher, Wembley in England, and Brian's teammate Ronnie Moore, Wembley in New Zealand. Highlights of the racing now. Here's the fourth race between Redmond, Waterman, Briggs and Moore. Ronnie Moore, who was in tremendous form, was an easy winner. Now race number 6. Lawson, Crutcher, Young and Moore. A real ding-dong and a thriller second for the crowd of 80,000. Young was well in the picture, but victory went to Ronnie Moore. Next race, number 7. Price, Biggs, Waterman and Nygrund. Ola Nygrund was on top of his form and was the young New Zealander's chief rival for the title. He certainly won this race in fine style. 13th race had Moore riding again against Forrest, Biggs and Pundin, but none of them had a chance against Ronnie in spite of his left leg being in an iron splint. You remember he broke his leg in Sweden last July. Brand, Crutcher, Craven and Waterman disputed the 16th. Masterly riding led to victory in this event for Ronnie's friend and teammate Brian Crutcher. 19th race saw Price, Crutcher, Redmond and Pundin in action. It also involved a nasty crack-up between Trevor Redmond, who crashed heavily, and Ove Pundin of Sweden. The 20th event now, Brand, Rigg, Nygrund and Moore. It would have meant a run-off for the title, and Ronnie Moore never put a foot wrong and went on to score yet another victory to become world champion. It was a terrific triumph for the 21-year-old Ronnie. His 5th championship final, and he'd ridden right through every one of his races with a clean sheet. And how how they cheered him at Wembley. Ronnie Moore, Speedway champion of 1954.
Yeah, 1954, 21 years old with a broken leg, and Bebop. This is Bebop. She's here hanging out with us here in the Hive. But he's 21 years old with a broken leg, and he's winning a world championship with a maximum score of 15 points. I mean, that guy's unbelievable. He was the youngest to ever race in the world championship. He was like 17 years old, and then at 21, he won his first world championship. That guy was unbelievable, and he raced in the British League for a long time also, from 1950 to 1974. He was really great. You know, Ronnie Moore, he had his own speedway track in New Zealand, and he used to teach the kids how to ride speedway. He was an unbelievable tutor. He gave his life to speedway. He was just a good guy, and he actually, I think it was like 74 or 76, he had this horrible crash, and they thought he was going to be dead, and they actually were planning his burial at the time, and then he came back to life. He lost his hearing because of the accident, and he actually went on to just tutor the young kids, and he had a speedway track and was holding races in Christchurch, New Zealand, and Ronnie Moore was just an unbelievable ambassador to the sport of speedway. He was really, truly one of the living legends. And if there was no Ronnie Moore, there would probably be no Barry Briggs or Ivan Mauger. Ivan Mauger said that. He said, if there was no Ronnie Moore, I would not be here. So Ronnie Moore was actually a very important part of Speedway history. Why? Because he inspired all these young Kiwis to race Speedway. And Christchurch, New Zealand is just not that big of a place, compared to the world. And it produced 3 world championship racers pretty much in the same era. They all raced against each other. Of course, Ronnie Moore was a little bit older, but Ronnie Moore was just really just the unbelievable talent, one of the most amazing riders, naturally gifted riders of all time. Here's Ronnie Moore before he passed away, and this guy is truly a living legend.
Ronnie, when was it that you first decided to start racing Speedway?
That was a good one. Way back in 1948, there's a horse training track out at Taitap. My old man's riding on it, and one day he said, "You want to have a ride?" Just had a meeting. I was 14, so he saw the ACU, they gave him permission, and I went out and I had a ride.
What was your feelings on it? Did you like it straight off, or?
A long way back and hard to remember, but it was exciting, but I thought that was once. And then Speedway started in Christchurch, so automatic, just started again.
Yeah, the Speedway, you stand up on the bike, so you know, I've seen you ride on the Wall of Death, and I saw you riding to school on your Triumph. But what about getting on a Speedway bike? You've got to stand up, get up the front. Did you do much practice before you started racing doing it?
No. Well, maybe I was just lucky, but that seemed to click fairly natural in it. Well, I was a bit short anyway, so I had to sort of stretch a little bit, but then a couple of years later Norman Parker came out and he started telling me little things as well, and from there on it just developed.
When you went to England, how many seasons had you done in New Zealand?
2.
2. And
2.
Did you feel satisfied that you was ready to go to England when you went to England?
There was no time for any fearing. Norman Parker didn't come and see me naturally, he saw Dad and said he'd like take me back to Wimbledon. This was on a Friday. I didn't have a passport, and on a Monday morning I'm in Wellington and on a ship and off to England. Afterwards, while I was on the boat, then I could start to think and analyse things a little bit, but I wasn't worried, just got to take it as it came.
Were you conscious of any names in England, or who was good riders and who was world champions? Did you know anything about the history of Speedway?
The only thing I did know, because it was in the paper out here in actual fact, that Tommy Price had won the world final, first Englishman to do it. And I met him 3 or 4 days after I landed in England. It was good.
Did you understand there was profession to be made? There was good money to be, you could make your living at it?
No. That, well, I knew you had to get going and make money so you could pay for a bike and things like that, but not as a living. I was too young. It was an interesting experience to see what would happen, and it worked.
Great. Okay, shall we give it a... We'll start right at the beginning again, Ron. We'll start right at the beginning again.
He's on next, I think.
Right. Ronnie, what do you remember of your first speedway ride?
Oh, that was a long while back. But it was a training track just outside Christchurch at Tap for horses, and they're having a motorbike meeting on it. I was 14 and Dad was riding on the Rudge, so I was out there with him, and he saw the ACU and they said yes, I could do one race, and he put me on the bike and I done it. And well, that was the first real feeling of speedway.
What age were you then?
I was 14 then, and that was it. The ACU sort of had to turn a blind eye a little bit on that one, but it didn't really matter.
What motorcycle racing did you do then, Ronnie? Is that the first motorcycle you'd ridden, or?
Other than on the Wall of Death, yeah. I never actually raced before in scrambles or anything like that, so it was the first feeling, which I liked, but it was just an afternoon out.
Yeah. The speedway bike, you ride different. You stand up, you get up the front of the machine to make it a little bit easier to slide. How did you take up this type of style?
I was lucky, I think, that things just seemed to click. I was a bit short, so I had to stretch a little bit to reach the handlebars, and I'd done a 1932 Rudge as well, which had a knee hook on it because my old man was riding the same bike and he used a leg trail. So I went up forward and rested against the knee hook, and that sort of held me in position all the time, and from then on, once I got off that bike, I automatically just went forward and in position all the time.
But you never leg trail like your dad?
No, definitely never leg trail. Oh, I did at times, but I didn't mean to. That was accidental.
When speedways started for real in Christchurch, what did you do about a bike? Did you decide what kind of bike, or you just took what was available?
Well, to start off with, I still had to use the Rudge. That was quite good. I mean, these days are on 4 valves. That was a 4-valve 1932 Rudge. But then a local firm, through pictures in the Speedway Star, made up a frame, and nearly everyone finished up on it. And so I had one too, but with a 32 Jap motor in. And then one day Dad bought me a brand new 4-stud Jap, and oh, that was mighty. It was terrific. Then we had a year on that, and Norman Parker came out here riding, and we bought a second-hand Starride frame off him and put my new motor into that, and that was it. That made it.
Yeah. What did you start at, Ronnie? Did you start handicaps or in a team, or how did you start actually in Christchurch?
Well, in those days everything was handicap. There was a scratch race in the end, I think, but the class of riding was so totally different that you just couldn't have everyone off the start. So it was handicap, and of course naturally to start off with I was off the front, but worked back until I was on a 150-yard handicap, which was, well, interesting to say the least.
And you was 150 yards, that's when you went to England, you'd work your way back to 150 yards?
Yeah. Actual fact, that was just in the start. In the later years out here at Ruapuna, I just had to give them half a lap start.
Yeah.
That was a little bit hard, that was.
Ronnie, when you went to England, were you a consistent winner in New Zealand?
No, not really. See, I came across here, I don't know, 1946 or something other, from Tasmania. And, well, I didn't have a passport. It was just on Dad's passport. But when I had to get a passport to go to England, well, I was issued a New Zealand one. but they looked upon me over there as an Australian. So to start off with, I rode for Australia in test matches.
Before you went to England, were you conscious of what English Speedway representative, who was the world champions?
Not really. I knew just through a photograph that appeared in a local paper here that Tommy Price was the first Englishman to ever win a world final. He just won it. But I looked upon England just as, well, at the track here. And so off we went, but I didn't realise until we got there how professional and how hard it was also.
Did you realise before you left that you could make a living riding Speedway?
Well, I didn't really. I wasn't old enough to sort of analyse all these things properly. I knew you raced for money and you had to have enough money to get a fare back to New Zealand, but I just didn't accept any of that until I landed in England, been in England about a month. Well, then I really and truly accepted it and had to get stuck in on it.
You went straight to a first division track, and at that time I believe there was 3 or 4 divisions running. Did you realise how big a jump you was taking by going straight into first division? Not
The day I arrived. I walked into Wimbledon Stadium and they was having their pre-season practice. And I always remember Dickie Harris coming down the straight, losing his handlebars and going straight through the fence. And we went round the pits and met Norman Parker. He arranged for me to borrow a bike off Mike Erskine, who rode for Wimbledon at those times. And I said to Norman, I'd never seen a track so small as Wimbledon. I said, how do I ride it? He said, well, same as Christchurch, flat. So I tried to ride it flat. I did actually make it for 3.5 laps before I came off, but everyone thought I was doing good.
Wow, he was good, and he actually started riding back in the early days, like I say, with the Wall of Death. When he did that interview, actually he had a hearing problem, so I'm surprised he actually did that interview so well, because that was actually Barry Briggs. Briggo was interviewing him, so that's cool. That's the next guy we're going to talk about is Barry Briggs. He was the interviewer of Ronnie Moore, and Ronnie Moore was a sensational rider. He started from the 170-yard line, and then he went halfway around the track. He was so good, they had to move him all the way around. I mean, can you imagine saying, like, I started from the 170-yard line? That was Ronnie Moore. He beat everybody. You know, when he went back to New Zealand, Christchurch, he was racing in the handicap, and they just kept pushing him back further because he beat everybody. And he was truly, just an unbelievable rider. And next, we're going to talk about Briggo. That was the guy interviewing Ronnie Moore in that particular interview. Briggo was born December 30th, 1934, and was the second New Zealander to burn up the speedway track. He burned them up also. These Christchurch guys, where did they come from? I mean, these guys are good. He was a 4-time world champion, Briggo was, and he made a record of 17 straight world final appearances from 1954 to 1970. Oh my gosh, Briggo, he was just unbelievable. So you have Ronnie Moore with 2 world championships, and then next you have Briggo with 4. What else could happen? We have Briggo here right now. Today we're going to blog a very famous speedway rider from Christchurch, New Zealand. Another rider from Christchurch. He won 4 world championships. Between he and Ivan Mauger, they won 10 world championships between them. Who is this very special rider? His name is Briggo, Barry Briggs. Barry was born in Christchurch, New Zealand, December 30th, 1934, and he raced at a very young age for the Wimbledon Dons in London. He was a teammate and joined Ronnie Moore. He was married over 40 years to his sweetheart June, who sadly passed away in 2003. She was considered the first lady of Speedway. They had 2 sons between them, Gary and Tony. Tony raced Speedway briefly. But you know, it's kind of hard to fill the footsteps of your father, who's named Barry Briggs. Barry was a 4-time world champion. He won championships in 1957, 1958, 1964, and his last one in 1966. He won the New Zealand Championship twice, in 1959 and 1963. He was a 6-time British Open champion. He was a 7-time British League champion. Barry won about every major championship you can win in the time he was racing. Barry won everything. He was just one of the most fantastic riders in his time. Barry raced for several British League teams, and he had his last race in 1976 for the Hull Vikings. In 1990, Barry was inducted to the New Zealand Sports Hall of Fame. After his retirement from Speedway, Barry moved to Los Angeles part-time, and he hobnobbed with lots of famous people like Evel Knievel and Steve McQueen. He actually taught Steve how to power slide on a Speedway bike and became good friends with the Hollywood actor. Barry spends a lot of his time these days in California. He often attends the Costa Mesa Speedway. I've seen Barry a few times when I was racing, but I'm always shy to go up to him like, "Hi, Barry Briggs." I also saw Barry back in the day when he was friends with Johnny and Janine Rocio. They'd always have these parties in La Mirada, California, and I was there, and then I would see Barry Briggs, and I was so shy. Barry Briggs, one of the most famous Speedway riders in Speedway history. From New Zealand, he was just an amazing talent. There's just some riders who are born natural Speedway riders, and Barry Briggs was a natural Speedway rider. So what else could you ask for? A 4-time world champion, a person who's won every major Speedway event in his time, and a great human being. Well, who is that? It's Barry Briggs. We salute you, Barry. You're one of the most famous riders in Speedway history, and you've done it all. Well, that's it. Barry Briggs, famous Briggo. He was just an incredible athlete, incredible human being. He was just a legend of Speedway. Barry Briggs is one of the most incredible human beings and racers in our time. You are truly a legend. Thanks for watching Barry Briggs. Hope you enjoyed it. And please like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. Barry Briggs was really good. He won his first world championship in 1957, and then he went ahead and repeated the world championship the following year in 1958. He was back-to-back world champion. I mean, this guy was good. And so 1958, he won his second world champion. Oh, and he was four-time world champion. And actually, we're going to see the 1958 World Championship. He actually scored a maximum of 15 points. He was really good. This is the 1958 World Championship with Barry Briggs maxing out the score.
Later, Barry was back at Wembley to try and repeat his triumph. Ovi Fundin was also looking for his second championship, as was England's Peter Craven. Briggs stormed into the lead in his first heat to set the tone for the rest of the night. The next heat went the same way. The first bend demonstrated his aggressive style. By scoring a maximum 15 points from his 5 rides, Barry took the title decisively. This time there was no need for a run-off for Barry. The dramas that year were provided by Peter Craven, Orb Lawson and Ken McKinley, who had tied for 3rd place. Craven and McKinley both crashed out, leaving Lawson to take 3rd. But once again, Briggs had beaten his arch-rival Fundin, this time without the controversy. Then, over a disagreement with Wimbledon over the princely sum of £30, the then current world champion announced his retirement from the sport.
Yeah, Barry raced for 5 British League teams in his illustrious career, and that was his second world championship, the back-to-back of his 4. And actually, he raced for like 5 British League teams, and one of his favorite teams was down south of England in Southampton Saints. Barry Briggs was a Saint, and that was actually one of his favorite tracks down in Southampton. I was there. I lived in that area for about 6 months, and they actually built a shopping mall where the speedway track was. And I would much rather have the speedway track than the shopping mall. And that was actually this is one of the last years of the Southampton Saints. And then a developer bought the land. Those crazy developers, we don't like those guys buying the land and then building malls. Forget the malls. Let's have the speedway tracks. Here's buried in Southampton before the mall.
Despite being their #1 rider, he missed the challenge of having a truly competitive teammate such as Ronnie Moore. So by 1960, he'd moved down to the south coast and joined the exciting Southampton team. In the colours of the Saints, he took great pleasure in beating his old Wimbledon rivals. By now, Barry had made a point of learning more about the mechanics involved. At Southampton, his battles with Ove Funding continued. Funding was riding for Norwich and was still the man to beat in Barry's eyes. Barry's 4 years at Southampton were happy times, both on and off the track. He was enjoying himself tremendously and had become quite a celebrity with the Saints fans. The Southampton track at Bannister Court always produced superb racing, and the atmosphere on race days had to be experienced. Björn Knudsen was scoring well alongside Barry for Southampton. The combination was good enough to break Wimbledon's stranglehold on the national title in 1962. But for the Saints fans and Barry, there was to be a shock in store. The Southampton track was to be sold for redevelopment. On top of that, the dangers of the sport were once more brought home to Barry. His friend and twice world champion, Peter Craven, was killed at the end of that season.
Speedway is a dangerous sport, and Peter Craven, his friend, passed away. And actually, the Southampton Saints had a really good Speedway team. And any team with Barry Briggs is going to be a really good team. And he just had an illustrious career. I mean, Briggo dedicated his life to Speedway. He was an ambassador. He even lost one of his fingers racing in a world championship. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But he was just an amazing rider, and he's a good guy. I was always shy to be around Briggo. And he's 87 years old today. He's still living. And actually, we're going to go back to his 80th birthday celebration, his honoring him 80 years, and he's pushing 90 today.
As far as you're concerned, Briggo, how are you enjoying life now? What are you up to?
Oh, I'm the luckiest bloke in the world, aren't I? I mean, so I've been through the tunnel, Speedway, and come out the other end virtually unscathed. And at my age now, I just can't believe that I'm getting away with what's happening. And I put a bit into it. I still do a bit of exercise because I want to do stuff as good as I can. But I now realise that living is for living. And you know, when I lost Junie, that was the biggest call, because it proved to me anybody could die, because she was near a perfect girl and she was taken away. And I just think this can happen to any of us, so you've got to live every day. And I do put a lot into every day, and she agrees with me as she's just fallen off the wall.
Brigo, God bless you, 87 years old. He's alive 7 years past that video. And we hope to see Brigo alive to over 100 years old. Why not? We love Barry Briggs. He is truly one of the great champions of all time and most beloved. Everyone loves Barry Briggs, and so do I. I never got to meet him too much. Maybe once I said hi to him, but it's kind of shy, meeting such a legend. You're very shy. You don't want to go up to him and say, "Hi, Barry." Like he doesn't know you. But Barry Briggs, we wish him all the best and good health and many more years ahead. And next we have the last but not least, we have the youngest of the three Kiwi riders we're profiling today. He was born in 1939, and he rode for 7 British League teams in his illustrious 24-year career. Can you believe that? This guy rode 24 years in the British League, and he won 6 world championships, and it's none other than the one of the greatest ever, Ivan Mauger. Today we're going to blog one of the greatest speedway riders ever to ride a 500cc speedway bike. A 6-time world champion from New Zealand, one of the greatest riders ever, Ivan Mauger. Ivan was born in Christchurch, New Zealand, October 4th, 1939, and he lived a full, rich 78 years. He passed away, rest in peace, April 16th, 2018. He married the same beautiful woman for more than 50 years. Ivan won world championships in 1968, 69, 70, 72, 77, and his last championship in 1979. He also won log track championships in 1971, 72, and 1976. British champion 1968, 70, 71, and 72. British League champion 1971 to 1973. Ivan had so many accomplishments, we cannot list them all here, so we apologize for that. But Ivan was truly the great. Ivan's speedway hero was New Zealand's speedway world champion, Ronnie Moore. Ronnie inspired Ivan and Barry Briggs when they were young boys. Ivan just wanted to be like Ronnie Moore, a world champion. He prepared at the age of 12. He worked delivering things, and he saved his money for his first speedway bike. In 1957, Ivan was a 17-year-old skinny little kid, and he saved his money. He traveled to England and raced for this Wimbledon Dons, his first speedway team. He also rode for 6 other teams. I'm sure everybody wanted Ivan Mauger on their team, right? He rode for the Rye House Roosters, Eastbourne Eagles, Newcastle Diamonds, Bellevue Aces, Exeter Falcons and Hull Vikings. While riding for the Bellevue Aces in 1970, Ivan became the first Triple Crown winner of the World Championship. Back to back to back world champion 1970, 1971, and 1972. No other speedway rider in history has won 3 world championships in a row but Ivan Mauger. Ivan received his 6th world championship while racing for the Hull Vikings in 1979 at the age of 40. In his home country of New Zealand, Ivan is considered a national sports hero. He won the New Zealand Championship in 74 and 81. Ivan raced his last speedway race in 1986, and his peers voted him the greatest speedway rider of all time. He was also voted the greatest rider of the 20th century. There was nothing that Ivan couldn't do. There wasn't a race that Ivan couldn't win. Well, that's it. Ivan Mauger, the great Ivan. Please like, subscribe, share, and ring that bell. Ivan won 3 world championships back to back to back. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, who does that? Ivan Mauger. And actually, George Wynn, who was one of our tuners in America, he actually tuned for Ivan Mauger back in the day. He moved to America. He migrated to Canada, and then he migrated to America. George Wynn. Do you remember that name? He actually told Ivan Mauger that if you win the 3rd world championship, we are going to gold plate that championship bike. And Ivan says, I will win that world championship. And he won that in 1972. So they took the 1972 Speedway bike, they shipped it from England all the way to America, to Los Angeles, and George Wynn and a partner, they took that bike and they actually gold plated it. They made it all pure gold. It's very expensive. I mean, who does that? George Wynn. George Wynn, I didn't think was a very rich guy because he actually worked on my bike for a while. And he just was a simple little old British man. He was a great guy, good, great mechanic, especially with the Westlake bikes. And then they actually gold plated that bike, and then they shipped it all the way back to England and gave it back to Ivan Mauger. And it's actually sitting in a museum today, I believe, in Christchurch, New Zealand. We're going to talk about that museum in a minute. But that's exactly what happened. And so we have the 1972 championship race that Ivan Mauger won to gold plate that particular speedway bike. And this was his 3rd Speedway World Championship in a row in 1972.
Britain's Betty Jenkins coming 3rd. Wembley. Top riders meet to decide this year's World Speedway Championship. This is Ole Olsen from Denmark, last year's world champ. 3, 2, 1, and they're off. In a heat which includes 2 Swedes and the English rider John Louis, who rides for the Ipswich Club. The Dane Ole Olsen, who also rides for Wolverhampton, slides off this one. Luckily, he's unhurt, remounts, and he's away. New Zealander Ivan Mauger, a force to be reckoned with on the track. In the lead, another Kiwi, Barry Briggs, number 5. The winner is Barry Briggs, who last won the world title in 1966. From Russia, with speed, comes Grigory Slinovsky, who crashes into Barry Briggs after he just clipped Bernd Pearson's back wheel.
Briggs' hand is badly hurt and he's rushed off to hospital, but the racing goes on. The pressure mounts as the final heats are played out. It's level on points. Ivan Mauger faces Bert Pearson for the final runoff of the world title. 75,000 watch as the two giants of the track from New Zealand and Sweden battle it out for the ultimate prize in World Speedway. Near the end now as Ivan Mauger holds his lead to flash over the finishing line. The World Speedway Championship goes to the Flying Kiwi, Ivan Mauger, for the fourth time.
Yeah, that was really cool. That was a close race, actually. And I believe that was the year that Barry Briggs lost his finger, and he actually was in the championship and he lost his finger. I believe that was the time when he lost his finger. So Barry Briggs gave a lot to Speedway, and so did Ivan Mauger. And he won that third world championship. Yeah, and that was really, in 72. That was cool seeing that video. And Ivan's wife discusses Ivan's early day Speedway. She knows the ins and outs of Ivan Mauger's. I think they're married for like 50 years. And actually, like I mentioned, George Wynn gold-plated that motorcycle, that beautiful World Championship motorcycle. And we're going to actually see that motorcycle in the next clip. It's really great. And Ivan Mauger, he had no university experience. They used to like ask Ivan, like, how much college do you have? And Ivan said, I don't have college. I'm a Speedway rider. And Ivan actually used to be shy, you know, that he didn't go to college and, you know, he didn't have university education. But after Ivan won his first of 6 world championships, he didn't care no more. Why? Because he was a world champion. He didn't care about the college anymore because he was a multi-time world champion. Here's his wife talking a little bit about Ivan.
So Ivan would talk to anybody. He was quite a humble person. He was modest. And he never thought of himself as being any different. We call him the King of Speedway now, but he didn't think like that. He was good at helping a lot of riders. He would actually give his bike to a rider to use, even if they were in the opposite team. But he helped the young riders. The New Zealand riders, he mentored a few of them. He sponsored a few of them and encouraged them to go to England. He actually run the training schools from one end of New Zealand to the other. When he was 15, he left school and was working. So it was all a matter of saving. We saved, both of us were saving for him to go to Britain to race. And to go to Britain to race was the only thing to do if you wanted to be a world champion. Tracks were actually all over New Zealand, but Christchurch was the big one. And it's where they brought all the overseas riders to race, where Ivan got the idea, if these guys can come into town and be so great, I want to be like them. That's another reason why he wanted to go to England. When Ivan was racing, it was an individual world championship, not a Grand Prix. It was a different way than they run it today. There was thousands and thousands of people watched. 120,000 at one of the tracks in Poland, and 90-odd thousand at Wembley in England. Whichever track it was, he knew it. He walked the track, he knew the track inside out before he ever raced on it. And if he went back there, he still walked the track. And it was like he felt it. And then he'd put his head down Not always, but quite a lot of the time. He'd put his head down, and just before he went out towards the tapes, and he would see himself going over the finish line, and it worked. And when he became world champion, he wasn't satisfied. It had to be another one and another one. When he won the third one, and the gentleman, Ray Bokerman, in California, said to send the bike over, that he would have it gold-plated if he won it. And then what was amazing, Ivan thought, oh, he won't bother. Didn't bother contacting him. And then he got, those days we had telegrams and faxes and things like that. And Ivan got word, we're waiting on the bike. So he then sent the bike over to be gold-plated. I think he'd like to be remembered as a person that was man-made, that came from an ordinary family, an ordinary working class family, very little schooling, and he achieved. He achieved through hard work. And I can remember actually that when he was interviewed many times by young people when he arrived in Christchurch, one of the questions they asked was, what university did you go to? And Ivan would say, I didn't go to university. And at first I think he was a bit embarrassed, but then when he won the World Championships, he didn't care a hoot.
Ivan, he just didn't care because he was great. He was voted Mr. Speedway in 2 different magazines, the Speedway Star and another one, the greatest rider of all time. The greatest. How would you like to be the greatest Speedway rider ever? To put on a pair of leathers and strap on a steel shoe. That's an honor. That's a true honor. And he just was really the greatest of all time. And Ivan Mauger just, I mean, who else is better than I? Every time when I post something in Facebook on a page and I say Ivan Mauger was the greatest of all time, everybody agrees. Ivan Mauger was truly the star of all Speedway stars.
He was the Speedway superstar, a 6-time solo world champion in the 60s and 70s.
Well, I wanted to be a world champion since I was about 10 or 11 year old.
Ivan Mauger was a Kiwi that could fly, a 3-time long track world champion and twice New Zealand Sportsman of the Year.
Here's one it. Mauger takes the title for the 3rd time.
And while Mauger spent the majority of his illustrious career in Britain, there was never any doubt where he hailed from.
The important thing is, OK, New Zealand produced 3 world champions, but the important thing is they all come from Christchurch.
I'm always aiming to win. It doesn't always make me that popular, I don't think, but I don't really see it as any other way. 2nd place really doesn't impress me very much, and to win, that's everything.
It was that obsession with being number 1 that saw 2 British magazines vote him the best of all time.
I think it's higher than anything I've won. To be voted the Millennium Man by people in 34 different countries, that's fellow competitors, journalists, spectators, ordinary citizens in those countries.
He retired to the Gold Coast in 1987, but was a prominent mentor and promoter of young riders. He hoped seeing the best in action here at Western Springs would spur on his apprentices.
I've got a couple of young boys in Christchurch and one in Invercargill, and that'll inspire them to go on and be world champions.
With more than 1,000 victories in 26 countries, in a career spanning 36 years, Ivan Mauger was the undisputed king of the track. Yeah, I would say he was the king of the track with all those accomplishments.
That was really amazing what he did. And actually, he went ahead and had this museum made because the family was kind of like, they all wanted his trophies and stuff like that, that gold bike. Everybody was kind of like vying for that particular, all the different trophies. He had like 4,000 trophies. And so everyone said, enough, we're going to make a museum in Christchurch, because he was a living legend, along with Ronnie Moore and Briggs, 3 guys all in the same era from New Zealand. That's just purely amazing. And these guys were just sensational riders. So they actually went ahead and they made a museum, and they put all of his trophies and stuff in the museum. And they just went ahead and had a shrine for Ivan Mauger, Ivan the Great Mauger. And here we are at the opening of that particular event at the museum, at the Ivan Mauger Museum in Christchurch, New Zealand.
Peter, just before you do the honours for us here, can you tell us the background to exactly how these exhibits were acquired or borrowed from the Mauger family, and indeed what we've got on show here?
Yeah, the main things which have been donated to the museum by the Mauger, as you say, the Mauger family, which is Ray, Ivan's wife, the children, Julie, who's the eldest, Debbie and Kim, are on the left here we've got the black leathers, which were in fact the leathers that he wore to win the world final between 68 and 72. The ones on the right are those that he won his later world finals. One of the stories behind the black ones is that he actually used to wear these rather than coloured leathers for a world final because A, they were terribly comfortable, but B, he also felt that rivals wouldn't know that it was him. That if he was behind, he wanted to be in a situation where they didn't know that it was Ivan Mauger behind the person. So he wore the black leathers because that's what the Russians and the Poles all wore. So it would take them a little bit off their guard. He had a great superstition about them. I would say that they would come out every year, but only for the world finals. When he won all of the 6 world finals with those 2 pair of leathers. The other particular important item that has been loaned to us is I don't know if you can all see the trophy down here, this big porcelain trophy which came from the 1970 World Final in Poland. That was when he became the only rider who has ever won 3 world titles in a row. The family, they all really wanted to keep that because they kept a lot of his personal possessions, but they decided they couldn't work out a way that each of them could have it. Only Julie could have it, or Debbie could have it, or Kim could have it. So they turned round and they said that what Ivan would have wanted was for it to go on display and to be open and available for the public, the fans. That he spent a lot of his time in England. He came over for the 2nd time in '63. That he stayed there until he retired. He loved England. He loved living in England. And he had a great, even though a lot of you may not have realised that he did have a great affection for British fans because they gave him so much, they supported him over the years, and he absolutely loved his time here. Also, I don't know whether he's here at the moment. Is Jim Hone here?
He's around here somewhere. Yeah, I don't know where he is.
Jim, who is Steve's father, Jim's in fact probably the longest standing friend of Ivan's that there is in this country, because Ivan and Ray, when they first came over in the 50s at Wimbledon, actually stayed with the Home family, so it's nice to have Jim and Steve here as well to see this. Also, later on, a gentleman called Brian Cowley will be talking about he's launching a campaign to have Ivan's memory honoured. And Ivan used to live in a road called Chester Road up in Bramall in Cheshire. They're now building a new housing estate opposite, and Brian is leading a campaign to have a road, either Major Avenue, Major Road, Major Close, or whatever, named after him. So I know that Brian has some leaflets, so if any of you can collect and help in the campaign would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Got the scissors. Time to do the honours.
All the best, Sprouts.
rider of all time, and it really is an appropriate tag to give to the 6-time world champion, Ivan Mauger.
Ivan Mauger was truly the great. Here's a picture of his gold-plated 1972 Speedway bike that George Wynn gold-plated for him, and Ivan in the background proudly displaying his hardware. That's a gold-plated Speedway. When have you ever heard and seen a gold-plated Speedway bike? I bet he didn't ride that bike again. That thing is in the museum, and like I say, that story of George Wynn, he actually was a part of that. He said, Ivan, if you win that 1972 World Champion for the 3rd time in a row, we're going to go ahead and gold plate that. Send it over to California, and we're going to fix you up. And George and a partner went ahead and gold plated that beautiful Jawa Speedway bike. And Ivan was just a big part of Speedway. You know, he developed so many Speedway riders, and you know, he was a manager of Kenny Carter, and he actually tried recruiting Ricky Wells in USA. Ricky Wells is actually a Kiwi descent. And I was talking to Trish Wells, Ricky's mom, and she said, you know what, Ivan Mauger is trying to recruit Ricky to be a Kiwi. And Ricky decided he was going to stay riding for America. So Ivan actually didn't do that, but Ivan was all over the place promoting Speedway and winning world championships. And here he is with 3. There's Ronnie Moore on the top right and Barry Briggs on the top left and Ivan Mauger on the bottom. I mean, that's the trio. That's the Kiwi trio. And they were just fantastic. I mean, Ivan Mauger was a big part of American Speedway. Why? In 1968, he was at the Whiteman Stadium teaching the Americans how to ride Speedway. And he actually got on a Speedway bike at the Whiteman Stadium. And guys like Slide and Sonny Nutter and Rick Woods, they were watching him and saying, we don't know if you're that good. And he went around and actually had an old JAP because he didn't have his Jawa. And he burned the track up. And he actually taught the Americans how to ride Speedway. Because in the old days, the Americans were like flat trackers, and they sat back on their butts, and they were kind of lazy like the flat trackers, right? And Ivan told the people, like, you need to get up on the bike and slide the bike and ride Speedway the real way. So Ivan actually taught them, and he actually like won all those world championships. Ivan was truly the great, and he held that throttle open at the Whiteman Stadium full bore. He almost blew that JP up, and he was just crazy. He was married to his wife. She was in the video for over 50 years, and his wife really knows a lot about him in 50 years. And he rode for Premier helmets. They actually had Premier helmets in the 70s. They sponsored a lot of American riders, and for a brief while, Ivan Mauger was a Premier helmet rider. That was pretty cool. That Premier was from America, and he was riding for that particular company. And he just was really an amazing rider. And he just rode for Exeter Falcons. He was just the rider that everybody wanted on their team. I mean, if you had Ivan Mauger on your team, you had a contender in the British League. He was that good. He was just really, and actually all 3 of these guys were really good. I mean, you have Ivan in the front, and you have Barry Briggs, and then you have Ronnie Moore. All 3 of these Kiwis, sensational guys. I mean, Briggs won 4 championships. Ivan Mauger won 6, and Ronnie Moore won 2. So that's 12 world championships between those 3 riders. I mean, from the same city. Look at that. They're all wearing New Zealand bibs. These guys are all like living in the same neighborhood, and they're winning 12 world championships. That's completely unbelievable. And then you have Briggo winning those 4 world championships. And there's Briggo on top in 66. He was a sensational rider. He was winning all the world championships, and everybody was taking their turns winning. And here's Briggo winning his first world championship. I mean, this guy was good. He was a young Briggo riding, and These guys were just sensational. I don't know where they got their talent. You know, New Zealand hasn't really produced this level of riding. It just had this spurt. And then I raced a few people from New Zealand, and they were nowhere near as good as these three guys were, let me tell you. And then here's Briggs again winning another world championship. And he was just crazy. I mean, that guy was good. And he winning world championships again. I mean, he just didn't stop winning those trophies. He probably has a pretty big trophy collection. And then in the early 70s, he became friends with Steve McQueen. There's Steve pinching Barry's beautiful cheeks. And they became friends. And Barry Briggs taught Steve McQueen how to slide a speedway bike. And Steve McQueen was in our last blog yesterday about the On Any Sunday. And Steve McQueen truly is an amazing ambassador to the sport of motorcycles. And he was a speedway rider. Did you know that? So that was pretty neat. And then the last rider, the first rider we blogged, was the amazing Ronnie Moore. Ronnie Moore was just a gifted rider. He was another Kiwi. He was the original Kiwi. He inspired Barry Briggs and Ivan Majors to become the champions they were and are. And actually, he started out at age 17 here. And he was just a young kid. I thought he was a pretty good-looking guy, actually. And signing all those autographs for the fans. He was a real natural. I mentioned in the beginning of the blog, he was a natural speedway rider. Ronnie Moore, he was really good. And a young, handsome guy. All the girls were after him. He was famous. He was good. He made like 60 pounds a week when he went over there, when he signed for his team in the Wimbledon. And he made a lot more money than that. But he was a star. He was a sensational rider. Ronnie Moore is one of my favorite riders of all time. I mean, this guy is good. And he actually was one of the first speedway riders to get up on the bike and slide. You know, the riders were kind of riding a little bit back on the speedway bike in the early days. And Ronnie Moore, he went ahead, was kind of the inspiration to go ahead and make the riders get up on the handlebars and slide the speedway bike. Like right here, here's Ronnie Moore getting up there. And look at it, he has his head over the handlebars. He has good throttle control. He's riding that old JAP. We had a blog about the JAPs were really hot bikes. They're fast. And he's just winning all those races. Watching Ronnie Moore's races, he's really good. I mean, that guy was unbelievable. I mean, he just blow you away when you watch Ronnie Moore race. And he won a world championship with a broken leg. Here's Ronnie Moore in 1950, and he just was a handsome guy. He started racing and being in the world championship at age 17 years old and won his first world championship at the age of 21. And so Ronnie Moore was just unbelievable talent. I mean, this guy was good, and he raced for all those years. He was a big part of Speedway, and he helped a lot of riders. He was a good man, and he gave back to the sport, as well as Barry Briggs and Ivan Majors all gave back to the sport. And Ronnie Moore won 2 world championships, and he was really good. We talked about the 1954 and the 1959. His first world championship he won with a broken leg. That guy's unbelievable. He had a broken leg. I think this was the picture right there. And he went ahead and maxed the score out with 15 points with a broken leg. I mean, who would do that but Ronnie Moore? These guys are sensational. And Ivan Major and Ronnie Moore were just 2 champions. Here Ronnie Moore is posing with the great Ivan Major. And Barry Briggs was another part of that team. I mean, this was a threesome that was unbelievable. And Ronnie Moore was just a gifted young rider. And this guy was good. There's Ivan Major there on the top and with Ronnie. And Ronnie was a handsome young man and a superstar. And his dad actually taught him how to ride in the wall of death at the age of like 10 or 12. He got in there and he was learning to ride motorcycles. There he is with his goggles on. He was a motorcycle rider, and he was a good motorcycle rider. When he got to speedway, he's like, no big deal, you know. And actually, in 1958, Ronnie Moore took off speedway and he went to race cars. I don't know why, but he went to race cars. He took the whole year off, and I believe that was the year Barry Briggs won the world championship. And then Ronnie Moore had said, enough of the race cars. In 1959, I'm coming back to race speedway. And so in 1959, Ronnie Moore returned back to speedway, and he had a pretty good year. He won the world championship after being racing cars. This guy was truly unbelievable. So we have these three Kiwis who were just sensational, and we feel that we have to honor them today because they were that good. Some of the great, actually these three riders were like in the top 10 greatest riders of all time, with Ivan Mauger on top, and then you have Barry Briggs and Ronnie Moore. But if you get a chance to see some of Ronnie Moore's races, he was really good. So Ronnie Moore was a gifted speedway rider. He was a talented rider. And let's go ahead and watch that 1954 World Championship.
Every bike, as you'd expect, has to be in perfect trim for the World Speedway Championship at Wembley. Finalists included Ola Nygren, Sweden, Jack Young, Australia and West Ham, Split Waterman, Haringey, England, Brian Crutcher, Wembley in England, and Brian's teammate Ronnie Moore, Wembley in New Zealand. Highlights of the racing now. Here's the fourth race between Redmond, Waterman, Briggs and Moore. Ronnie Moore, who was in tremendous form, was an easy winner. Now race number 6. Lawson, Crutcher, Young and Moore. A real ding-dong and a thriller second for the crowd of 80,000. Young was well in the picture, but victory went to Ronnie Moore. Next race, number 7. Price, Biggs, Waterman and Nygren. Ola Nygren was on top of his form and was the young New Zealander's chief rival for the title. He certainly won this race in fine style. 13th race had Moore riding again against Forrest, Biggs and Pundin, but none of them had a chance against Ronnie in spite of his left leg being in an iron splint. You remember he broke his leg in Sweden last July. Brand, Crutcher, Craven and Waterman disputed the 16th. Masterly riding led to victory in this event for Ronnie's friend and teammate Brian Crutcher. 19th race saw Price, Crutcher, Redmond and Pundin in action. It also involved a nasty crack-up between Trevor Redmond, who crashed heavily, and Ove Pundin of Sweden. The 20th event now, Brand, Rigg, Nygren and Moore. It would have meant a run-off for the title, and Ronnie Moore never put a foot wrong and went on to score yet another victory to become world champion. It was a terrific triumph for the 21-year-old Ronnie. His 5th championship final, and he'd ridden right through every one of his races with a clean sheet. And how they cheered him at Wembley. Ronnie Moore, Speedway champion of 1954.
The youngest rider to win the world championship at that time at 21 years old, Ronnie Moore, with a broken leg. And that guy was just crazy. And he smoked those guys. I mean, he was good. So thank you so much for watching the Kiwi Adventure. The 3 Kiwis, Ronnie Moore, Barry Briggs, and Ivan Mauger. These guys were sensational. I mean, some of the greatest speedway riders of all time. I just am amazed when I watch those three guys ride. They are truly heroes. They are truly legends. And Barry Briggs is a living legend still today. And we wish Barry Briggs all the best, all the health, and many more years of happiness. So we thank you so much for hanging out with us in the Hive, watching the Speedway history, this amazing Speedway history with these stars of Speedway. They are truly great legends of the sport. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Please have a great day. Ride safe. Be smart. Stay on two wheels. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to see you next race.